Hello, in this video we'll look at a new version or release of CSS software that will be introduced at the end of April 1997. This software release will change completely the way in which joint use devices such as DACS, ISDN2 and WB900 are recorded in CSS local network records. The release will be known as CSS Release 35 or probably just Release 35. This video is the first in a series of training modules which will prepare you to continue to use CSS after the introduction of Release 35. Not all the modules will be in this video format. Most, in fact, will be computer-based training, usually referred to as CBT. The CBT training will simulate the new and revised Release 35 CSS transaction screens. This video is for people who already work with the Access Network and CSS. It therefore assumes that you have a knowledge of both of these and are familiar with the existing popular terminology and CSS transaction mnemonics. Release 35 changes will affect both the external and the frame records. This video will also describe to you why the way CSS records joint use had to be changed and the principles behind the format or structure of CSS for records of joint use. Now, it's vital that you understand this new structure for the rest of your training to be meaningful. Even if you only use CSS to a very limited extent, for example to display routings. Release 35 changes are going to be mainly concerned with joint use records and will not change the way CSS records straightforward copper pairs. First of all, let's just ensure there's no confusion about what is meant by joint use. Joint use is a term which grew out of the old shared service facility. In Strowger days, shared service allowed two customers to use one pair of wires in the access network for their service, but only one customer at a time could use a phone. Nowadays, joint use has come to be generally accepted to mean a device placed in the network which will enable two customers to use one pair of wires at the same time. Or alternatively, the device could give one customer two services which they could also use at the same time. So why did the joint use structure in CSS need to be changed? Well, quite simply, it needed to change because joint use has changed. So with the introduction of Release 35, the term joint use will become defunct. The new term for devices in the network, which will include the corresponding exchange end equipment, is Copper Enhancing Technologies, or CETs for short. Now, CETs is a term which will include all technologies or devices installed in the access network which enable more than one service to be provided over a pair of wires. CETs will also include the provision of high-capacity or wideband private services over copper pairs. So whereas joint use referred to devices such as DACS, WB900, ISDN2, and for those of you who know routing well, WB1000, WB1400, WB1900, well, CETs will include all of these and, in addition, line concentrators, HDSL, and any new devices which are introduced. CETs do not include, however, non-copper-based services in the access network. For example, services provided over optical fibre or by radio systems. Therefore, TPON, FAN, LA30 and so on are not included. These systems are usually referred to as new technologies. It's important to remember the term CET, Copper Enhancing Technologies, because it will be used throughout the rest of your training. Now, we mentioned earlier that the joint use recording structure needed to be changed because joint use had changed. This is because the old joint use structure was limited to devices in which one copper pair provided two services. Now, with today's increased volumes and varieties of CET device, this is simply no good anymore. So BT needed a structure which could see and manage devices with a variety of inputs-outputs. For example, a 1+10 device was trialled recently. Also, those of you who are more familiar with CSS will be aware that if one channel of a joint use device was ceased, then the device became invisible in the remaining service. This obviously caused difficulties in repair handling and meant that we couldn't utilize or route over the spare channel. This was clearly unacceptable for BT, as it was difficult to manage and reap the benefits of the increased capacity in the network created by CETs. So let's summarise. So far there are 5 important points to remember. The way joint use devices are recorded in CSS is to change completely at CSS Release 35. From the introduction of Release 35, any network device which enables the provision of more than one service over one pair of wires will be known as Copper Enhancing Technology, or CET. The changes will enable CSS to record the larger volumes and varieties of CETs. The changes will give CSS better visibility of CETs, allowing more effective management of channels. And last but certainly not least, you must fully understand this new structure to be able to read CSS routings of joint use circuits successfully. So we've looked at why we needed to change the way we recorded joint use and introduced the concept of CETs, covering all copper joint use products. Well, here we have 2 customers with the customer unit fitted at the DP. Let's now look at how the structure of CET records will change with Release 35. This is a typical diagram. The parts of the route shown in red are common to both customers, so this is the joint use part, while those shown in green are individual to the customer. This is a similar illustration, but this time a DACS unit is fitted at the PCP. Again, we can see the common parts and the parts that are unique to each customer. Please notice that we're concerned with the whole routing, right from the exchange equipment through to the customer. This obviously includes both the frame record and the external record. Okay, that's how it is now. So what about after the introduction of Release 35? Remember we said that the term joint use would disappear and the new name would be Copper Enhancing Technologies. Well, I have another new term for you. The field or customer end device of a CET is to become a Network Enhancing Device, or NED. A Network Enhancing Device, or NED, is a node in its own right, just like a DP or PCP. It can be fitted anywhere in the network, including after the DP. So let's have a look at a diagram of 2 customers served by a DACS at the DP again, but this time using the new record structure with the customer's end device being a NED, which, as I just mentioned, is a node in its own right. Notice in particular that the DP has a D side. This is new for Release 35. There is also an E to D connection in the DP. This cross connection will exist in the new record structure, but it will always be a one-to-one connection, which means that pair 1E will be connected to pair 1D, pair 2E to pair 2D, and so on. But don't worry, this will not have to be entered manually with the new recording system. Again, also notice that the NED has E and D sides, but there's no jumper connection between them. Instead, this is where the electronics are contained. Similarly, where the DACS NED is fitted at the PCP, we can again see that there's no physical connection across the NED. In a moment, we will look at how this break fits in with the new CSS record structure. Previously, we looked at how a route with DACS was broken up into parts that were individual to one customer and parts that were jointly used. Let's do that again, but consider the parts which are individual to the customer and the parts which are individual to, or rather support, the CET device. Again, here's the end-to-end picture. This is the part that is unique to the customer. Now let's highlight the part which is individual to the CET device. Notice the break in the CET field end and exchange end devices, which we commented on earlier. And again, here is a similar illustration with a PCP-mounted DACS. This is the route that supports the customer. And this supports the CET device. So does this mean that in the new structure, the part of the routing which supports the individual customer is attached to the customer record, and the part which supports the CET device is attached to the NED record? Well, this is nearly correct. The problem is, though, that in CSS, the NED record is not suitable for attaching routings to. So to overcome this problem, we need to introduce the last new routing term for CSS Release 35, the Transmission Bearer Group, or inevitably TBG for short. Just as the customer record connects the customer to the exchange, so the Transmission Bearer Group, or TBG record, attaches the field end device of a CET to the exchange end device. Therefore, just as the routing exclusive to the customer is attached to the customer record, the routing, or indeed routings exclusive to the CET, are attached to the TBG record. Okay, so what happens if we have a device such as a line concentrator which requires 16 pairs between the exchange and field end devices? Well, quite simply, the 16 routings can be attached to the TBG record. And again, for an HDSL device which requires 3 pairs, then 3 routings can be attached, and so on. Similarly with NEDs, for instance, a DACS or WB900 which supports 2 customers will have 2 D-side terminations. And a large line concentrator, for example the 16 plus 96 type, will have 96 D-side terminations. And for those of you who use CSS records extensively, let's look at a diagram of a line concentrator installed at a PCP. Well, as you can see, fundamentally the structure is similar to those we've already seen. Okay, let's just summarize again for a moment. The customer end parts of CETs will be a new type of node known as a Network Enhancing Device, or NED. A new record, the TBG or Transmission Bearer Group, will link the field end and exchange end parts of CETs. Routings of pairs exclusive to individual customers will be attached to the customer directory number record as they are now. Routings of pairs which connect CET exchange and field end devices will be attached to the TBG record. Now, what we've seen so far may raise a number of questions for you. Don't worry about them at this point, as the rest of your training should cover them. The important thing to remember is the new record structure and the new terms and what they mean. Sounds complicated? Well, with Release 35, a great deal has been done to make CSS operation as efficient as possible. For instance, the NED and TBG identities are automatically generated by the system. Moving from customer routes to TBG routes and back has also been made as simple as possible. Arrangements are also being made to correct the records of all existing joint use devices and convert them to the new CET format. Before we finish, let's just mention a few further points. The terminations of a NED can be either spare or in use. This means that they can be routed on as if they were ordinary copper DP pairs. As CSS will allow you to move from records of customer pairs to records of TBG pairs and back again very simply, displaying routings will not be difficult. NEDs will be defined by type and will have an appropriate number of customer and TBG terminations for that type. In the future, new NED types can be introduced without further software changes to CSS. The new Release 35 structure will be used to record all devices, including ISDN2 and line concentrators. And for those of you who know about line concentrators, an LC16 plus 96, for instance, will become a NED with 16 TBG terminations and 96 customer terminations. The old type of line concentrator trunk pairs, usually referred to as L pairs and hypothetical pairs, will disappear, although H pairs will still be able to be routed to frame 9 for new technology only. Release 35 will also improve the visibility of CET devices in repair service transactions. Okay, that's about it for now. I hope this video has provided a useful insight to the joint use access network record changes you can expect to see within CSS as a result of Release 35. The next phase of your training will be tailored to your needs and will show you the new routing pair display screens and the new node screens. For those of you who use CSS routing in great depth, for example in routing offices and scheme recording, then the changes to the transactions which modify routings will also be taught, as well as some of the other features and facilities that will be made available with the CSS Release 35 software. Thank you for watching.